Welcome to another episode of Inquiring Minds. I am Steve Harper, and with me as always is my amazing co-host, Donna Carlin. Donna, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm really looking forward to continuing our conversation from last week.
Me
So this is
too.
going to be good.
This is going to be a fun continuation, and one that I think is going to speak to a lot of people out there because it's something that's being talked about a great deal.
You know, a few weeks ago, I remember sharing a quote with you that said, "It's not what you are that holds you back; it's what you think you're not." That was Dennis Waitley, and then last week we talked about the syndrome, and I think that there's a correlation there. It's also popping up, with a lot of my clients. And I was thinking, there's a quote that I read somewhere: "Success is not the absence of failure, but the courage to persist despite it."
I
And
love
then
that.
I was thinking, imposter syndrome is a silent barrier to our true potential. It whispers doubt where there should be confidence. That's exactly what what imposter syndrome is, and it's
Yeah.
self-doubt in leadership roles. It's fear of failure and perfectionism. It's comparison and competitiveness to somebody else that you don't measure up. Underestimating your accomplishments, like you talk them down. Oh, it's not a big deal when somebody tells you that was amazing. It's not a big deal. Like anyone could do it, like that kind of response. And it's a reluctance to take on new challenges in case we fail or don't measure up.
Yep.
It keeps us back, it holds us back. And I think it shows up way too often. I'm not quite sure how we're wired that it happens. I think it usually comes from feedback that was not well given, like earlier on in our lives, that make us question our worthiness or our contribution, our leadership, whatever it is. And I think it would really be beneficial to our listeners to, hear us engage in this conversation. So I wanted to ask you, where does it come up for you?
Well, it's really a unique perspective. I was actually watching. I'll give you a really quick story. I was watching a documentary yesterday with my wife, Kathy. We were watching the Dolly Parton documentary on Netflix, which, if you haven't
Oh,
seen it,
cool.
it's really, really interesting. And she was talking about her upbringing. Came from a very poor background. They were backcountry family in the mountains of Tennessee, and how one of the strengths that people identify with her is that she has so much confidence. And she said, growing up, she wasn't going to be able to get that. She didn't have great shining examples of that. She didn't have necessarily, anybody in her family that thought, she could go out and do what she's done. But at the end of the day, they give her a lot of confidence in her ability to be unique and be on her own. And what I thought was really interesting was she overcame those odds despite the environment and the community she was in, which the kids that she grew up around, not necessarily her family, but a lot of them were really, really kind of ugly to her and really, put her down and made fun of her and, whatnot. And I was asking my wife, we finished watching, and I said, how do kids actually figure out how to be mean to each other?
Yeah.
How does that happen? And we started talking about, we had this great conversation about, you have to be shown that. And you actually have to experience it in a way that, somehow causes you harm so that you feel compelled to go cause someone else harm, right? Putting somebody down, making fun of their clothes, their family, their upbringing, or whatever. And I think about the imposter syndrome being the same thing. Somebody had to put you into that box to make you feel like you weren't adequate enough. You weren't enough. You weren't smart enough. You didn't have the background or the pedigree. And really, at the end of the day, we become victims of generational approaches to this, where whether it be a parent, whether it be a teacher, whether it be a coach, a first romantic relationship, or just our friends, it's sad when you think about it. It's like, where did that come from and why does it happen? But when it does, it can be debilitating to people. And that's where I think imposter syndrome really kind of starts. That's where the root of that problem starts to take hold, in that we feel like, even though we might be experiencing some success, or we might be doing some things that other people look at and in awe, we still have those same poor self-image issues that somebody else placed in us. And so I thought it was really fascinating we'd be talking about this topic today because, it's interesting to try and discern where that comes from, how it started for us as individuals. But I bet everybody that hears this episode will have experienced it at some point in their life. And sometimes it becomes or manifests in that imposter syndrome, which can be, so detrimental to your career success, and your personal relationships.
Like looking back at what you said about kids, I think they learn from watching their parents.
Yeah.
Their parents sit around ridiculing somebody, that they just saw who looked horrible or, dressed terribly or whatever. And they're modeling this behavior to their kids. The kids see the parents doing it and thinking, my parents do it, it must be right. Must be the right way to do it. And they just, do that in their own context. It's really amazing. I tell people that there's two ways that you could go about doing something when you're put down. I remember, and I think I shared this before, but I think it bears repeating. When I was in high school, my functions teacher used to literally ridicule me in front of my entire class. Why can't you be as good as your brother? Because my brother
Hmm.
would get hundreds in math. I got in the 90s. How horrible is that? But it was never good enough. And he used to
Yeah.
ridicule me. You'll never measure up to your brother. And it got to the point where I walked into the principal's office and said, I'm not writing my matriculation in functions. I don't want to ever look at that teacher again. And my parents didn't know that I did this. Thankfully, the principal listened to me and listened to why I said it and gave me permission not to. In those days, you needed 10 out of 11 marks that were above 75% to get into McGill. And so I was not giving myself that buffer, that extra class to get my average up. I had to ace all the other classes in order to be accepted, but there was no way I was putting myself through that
Yeah.
anymore. And I remember having that conversation with my brother years later because he introduced me to a colleague of his saying all the artistic talent in the entire family went into Donna. And I looked at him like he was nuts. Here's a man who's been, given awards by United Nations, by our parliament, by the Japanese government for all his work in innovation and medicine. And he's saying that I'm the most creative person in the family. It's just, how do you define it? And we had that conversation for the first time ever. And it's not so long ago. That's to say, creativity comes in all shapes and sizes. And every single person in this world has this unique contribution, this unique combination of skill sets and everything else that if they literally paid attention to it, they would be the only, not the best, but the only to do what they do so very well. We're just so busy comparing ourselves to other
Yeah.
people and thinking that they're the ones that are going to make the $6 million salary. Who are we to do it? That's because we do not look at ourselves through a unique lens of who are we that is different than everybody else.
Yeah.
And the imposter syndrome, strangely enough, usually shows up with people in leadership positions.
That are
Doesn't happen with,
successful. Yeah.
yeah, with
Yeah.
secretaries. And I'm trying to figure out, like, what the heck? This is nuts. Why are you already at the top of your game and you're doubting yourself every minute? Who are you comparing yourself to that is telling you that you don't measure up? And somebody's going to wake up tomorrow morning and realize I shouldn't have this job. Now, I mean, that's what happens, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to be found out, that kind of thing. It's mind boggling. So how have you dealt with it if you've seen it?
Well, I look at it, kind of two things that I take away from what you just said is I still go back to how did that start? Who put it in your head? Because at some point somebody had to place it there, right? And I think that that's an important distinction for people to think about because you need to look back on who those people were. I always liken it to kind of the long play album, a vinyl record. That
Yeah.
scratch that happens it's painful. It hurts and it's never goes away and it's really difficult for us to overcome. And even though we may push it way down in our psyche, it always has this tendency to bubble up. And usually it does manifest in those moments of something's going really well. And so you somehow have to right the ship by saying, well, it's not going to because so and so said it won't, or I don't deserve this. I don't belong here. And I think it's really important for people to really explore who created those scratches in your record and figure out how to buff them out, right? In a way that allows you to play without actually worrying about it any longer. And I was thinking back to this documentary I saw on Dolly Parton, and they asked the question, how did you find that confidence, right? And she said, I was, and she still to this day knows that she's kind of an overmade that she's tried to make herself into a larger than life sort of character. But she said, people were laughing at me, and I just had to remind myself one day I'll be the one laughing at them because the joke's on them, not on me. And so whatever they say, whatever they do, whatever they think, that's their problem. I know where I'm going and I know what I want to do. And I think about that from a sort of a self-realization perspective is how do you get to that point in your life where you have to say, gosh darn it, everybody else has their opinions. And, like you and I've talked about on the show before, their opinion is not any of our business. But how do we focus on the opinion that really matters, which is the one that we have of ourselves? And when those feelings of being an imposter, being some sort of fraud, or being potentially found out, when those moments arise, it's your gut check saying, look, this is an opportunity for you to get stronger and better and to buff out the record, that scratch that somebody else put in there so long ago, and realize that you need to reassess. You need to look at where your life is today. You need to understand that you didn't get here just because you were lucky. You got here because you are deserving to be here. And you have to figure out how to overcome whatever deep-seated challenges somebody put in your psyche and realize that you are the only one that matters in that moment. And I think that helps identify that. And so for me, I've had those moments of imposter syndrome so many times in my life. And I have in my older years now learned to breathe through them. When it comes up, it's like, interesting. Why is that coming up for me right now? Why is this a challenge or a concern? Why am I allowing myself to give all my power away to something that somebody said 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago? Their opinion, their thoughts of where I am and what I'm doing is none of my business. And I shouldn't make it my business by absorbing it and utilizing it as my positive or negative, direction, orienter going forward. And so for me, I think the more that I can identify those situations as they happen, recognize them for what they are, and then find my way through it, that's where I've been able to overcome that.
That's really well said. I look at it from the perspective of people think that they have the right to say whatever's on their mind, whether or not
Especially now
it's,
in
it's
today's world.
hurtful.
Oh my
That's right.
gosh.
It's hurtful or not,
Yep.
but it will not stick without your permission. So, in other words, the only way it's going to stick and you're going to own it or be haunted by it is if you give them permission to make it stick. And all it takes is for you to say, I'm not giving them permission to label me, to say something that I'm going to live by, because one of my mantras, what somebody else thinks of me is none of my business. Well,
Yep.
there's another one. The other one is, I will not give my personal power away to somebody I least respect at that moment in time. Makes me an idiot, and I don't want to be an idiot.
Yeah.
So, if somebody says something to you that tells you that you don't measure up or whatever, ask yourself, do I respect somebody who might say that to me? And rather than help me build up to somebody amazing, you're knocking me down for whatever reason that you have of your own. So, really, I will not give my personal power away to somebody I least respect, because I can't respect somebody who demolishes somebody for sport, for joy, for whatever reason
Yeah.
they're doing it. It's like that math teacher. I absolutely had no respect for that man whatsoever,
Yep.
and I felt really good about extricating myself from that class. It was the best thing that I could have done, and I went into music science, obviously in university, so I needed my math, but it was absolutely a perfect moment for me to say, no, not doing it anymore.
Yeah.
Not going to, put myself in front of somebody who, rather than teach me, is ridiculing me. Not acceptable.
Well, and I challenge our audience to go out and look at their own lives and those individuals, those experiences, and rather than hide from them or keep them pushed way down, figure out how to pull them out, figure out what
Yeah,
the situation was, what the motivation was, and to your point, why do you continue to give the power to someone that you least respect in this moment, right? I love that mantra, because at the end of the day, when you start to look at that, I think about my English teacher who told me I should never even think about being a writer. I think about one of the teachers that I had that's told me I was just too dumb, that it was, I needed to be in, special needs classes, and, all of these things. And those things worked into my 20s, they worked into my 30s, they worked into some of my 40s, as I was growing up and realizing how much power I was giving to people that really had no clue really what talents and gifts I had, because they never took the time to get to know me. And when
yeah.
you bring that out and you start to recognize that, okay, maybe I'm not the math whiz, maybe I could be a better writer, maybe I could do some things different. Had they taken the approach that, hey, look, I want to make you better, I want to build you up instead of tear you down. Now suddenly you realize I feel sorry for them. I feel sorry for anybody that was taught by them, or anybody that actually had to be around them, because you have to be a pretty miserable person in your life to want to put somebody else down in that regard. And we've all probably been victim of doing it, and we've all been victim of receiving it. And we can do better, and we need to do better. And so for our audience, I would challenge you to go back and look at those situations, figure out where those scratches are in your record, and figure out what you need to do to buff them out so that you can play forward, not backwards.
Absolutely. And shadow coaching, is my specialty, and imposter syndrome absolutely resides there. Remember, if you shine a light on that which is dark, it no longer is dark. It's no
Yeah.
longer a shadow. It gets it out in the light, process it, figure it out, and look it straight in the face and say, no, I'm not doing this anymore. And the second thing is, if you have children or the youngins that you might influence in some way, shape, or form, remember they're watching everything you do and everything that you say.
Yep.
So model what you want them to take away from this, which is the good stuff, not the bullying, not the putting people down, not the ones that might influence this happening to the future generations.
Mm-hmm.
So just keep that in mind. They're watching everything that you do, everything that you say, and act accordingly.
That's absolutely right. It's a great reminder for sure. Well, I'm curious what our audience thinks of this particular episode, because it really does dovetail nicely into last week's episode. So, what are you taking away from this conversation? What has this brought up for you? We'd like you to share with us. And so, Donna, how can they do that?
Go join our Facebook group, Inquiring Minds with Donna Carlin and Steve Harper. Let us know what you think, what you took away, what you want us to discuss. Throw in your 3 cents. We'd love to hear. And obviously, we're on podcast channels right across the board. And just join the family. It'd be great to hear from you.
Absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly. We'd love to invite you in, and would love to hear how these conversations are kicking off other conversations in your own, families, your own networks. So, Donna, this was great. Thank you so much for another great episode. I look forward to, seeing you again on our next one for Inquiring Minds. We'll be back again very soon with a new episode. And until then, Donna, have a great day.
You too.